Flight attendant calls security on black woman, but she's actually an FBI agent. In a bustling airport where journeys begin and destinies intersect, one fateful flight changes everything. Tensions spark the moment a misunderstanding erupts between a seasoned flight attendant and a black woman quietly reading in first class. The atmosphere crackles with drama as an unspoken bias triggers a stunning overreaction and security is suddenly summoned. But there's more to this mysterious passenger than meets the eye. When the truth finally emerges, it will topple careers and ignite a storm of revelations no one saw coming. Prepare for a story of prejudice undone, concealed identities revealed, and karma hitting harder than anyone imagined. The day began the way many travel days do under the watchful lights of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest airport in the world. It was a Saturday morning, and the usual hum of thousands of travelers echoed through the vast terminals. People bustled from check-in counters to security gates, their footsteps merging into a near-deafening cacophony of excitement, dread, or bored routine. Olivia Campbell, a 39-year-old flight attendant with over a decade of experience, adjusted her neatly pinned-up hair for what felt like the 20th time that morning. She had just grabbed a quick latte, half daydreaming about her upcoming layover in Los Angeles. She thought about the beaches she'd see if she had the time and the shopping she wanted to do. She was proud of her record of impeccable service. A disciplined professional, Olivia knew how to handle crowds, so-called difficult passengers, and even the occasional minor crisis in the sky. In her mind, she was practically unshakable. Yet, behind her crisp uniform and polished smile, Olivia was nursing a frustration she hadn't shared with many. Last month, a corporate memo had enforced new regulations about the size and weight of carry-ons. This policy had increased passenger complaints, and the flight attendants were caught in the crossfire. Olivia felt it was just one more stress added to her already demanding job. On top of that, rumors circulated that management was cracking down, distributing secret shopper-style reviews on flight staff. Being scolded by a superior over even the smallest infraction was now a looming fear. Tension simmered under Olivia's calm facade, and a sense of looming trouble prickled at her nerves. Less than 100 feet away, Special Agent Ramona Jefferson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation walked briskly toward her gate, trying not to spill the coffee in her styrofoam cup. She was returning from a brief but critical training seminar in Atlanta, heading back home to Los Angeles before commencing her next undercover assignment. Her job demanded she live her life on the go, always traveling, always packing up her life into compact suitcases and heading off to new destinations. Her official capacity as an FBI agent wasn't known to the general public, of course. On top of that, Ramona had a knack for blending into the background. She preferred not to draw attention to herself. Clad in comfortable slacks and a loose blouse, she could have been anyone: a busy mother, a corporate consultant, or a grad student. Only her eyes, alert with acute awareness of her surroundings, hinted that there was more beneath the surface. She carried herself with quiet confidence and grace, accustomed to negotiating unpredictable environments, whether behind a desk interviewing suspects or out in the field. Fate was already at work that morning, as these two women, Olivia and Ramona, prepared to board the same flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Unbeknownst to either of them, their paths would intersect in a way that would create headlines, shake corporate policies, and expose some ugly truths about prejudice. In the swirl of thousands of travelers, with planes arriving and departing every few minutes, destiny was bringing them together for a reckoning they could never have anticipated. Gate A27 at Hartsfield-Jackson was bustling. Families with small children were attempting to corral their little ones, while singles and business travelers searched for available seats to wait out the final boarding call. Some travelers were on their phones, lost in conversations about deals, jobs, and personal stories. A few were finishing breakfast from nearby fast food stands, balancing wrappers and luggage. Olivia Campbell was already stationed near the boarding door, greeting each passenger with practiced smiles and a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Welcome aboard. How are you? Please watch your step," she repeated. She was trying to push away the nagging tension in her gut. She didn't know if it was the uneasy sense that someone might be evaluating her or just the stress of working on a weekend flight, which often carried more families and complicated seat assignments. Before too long, the Sky Priority boarders and first-class ticket holders were called. Ramona Jefferson emerged from a small crowd, first-class ticket in hand. She had booked it using her accumulated travel points, a small luxury to reward herself after the grueling training sessions in Atlanta. Her job as an FBI agent came with certain benefits, and the occasional chance to fly first class was a welcome reprieve from the daily pressure of her work. Olivia greeted her with the same smile she gave everyone else, yet something about Ramona's presence seemed to register with the flight attendant in a subtly different way, perhaps a tinge of surprise. Ramona was a black woman, somewhat young looking for first class, and she carried herself with a poised but discreet manner that some might misconstrue as aloofness. Olivia's eyes flickered over Ramona's clothes. Though she told herself it was standard procedure to appraise a passenger, a small, unwelcome seed of bias crept in. She felt a flicker of suspicion she couldn't quite articulate. As Ramona entered the aircraft, she found her seat in first class, 2A, next to a window. She stowed her carry-on meticulously in the overhead bin, careful not to crush the briefcase containing her documents. She took a seat, exhaled, and silently prepared to spend the next several hours reviewing a few case files on her tablet, undercover details she had to keep private. On the other side of the dividing curtain in coach, confusion reigned. A family of 4 was trying to figure out seating arrangements, while another passenger insisted on rearranging items in the overhead bin. Olivia was busy, back and forth, helping people find seats, ensuring compliance with the carry-on regulations, keeping the aisle clear, and simultaneously trying to manage the other flight attendants. It was a typical scenario, but for Olivia, it felt more oppressive than usual. She had no inkling that, in mere hours, her career and, more importantly, her reputation would stand at the center of a national controversy. Nor did Ramona have the slightest idea that her calm, composed presence and unimpeachable credentials would be called into question. All they both knew in that moment was that soon the plane would taxi down the runway, and everyone on board would be locked in an airborne microcosm where tensions might flare and consequences would be unavoidable. Once boarding was completed and the cabin door sealed, the aircraft pushed back from the gate. The pilot announced flight times, weather conditions, and an expected smooth journey. Ramona placed her phone in airplane mode and tucked it into her purse. She casually took out an reader with a nondescript cover, flipping to the page she'd left off on the night before. The title of the e-book was unrelated to her work, just a suspense novel she was reading for relaxation. In the galley near first class, Olivia and 2 other flight attendants were preparing for the in-flight service. She double-checked with her fellow attendant to ensure the pre-departure beverages had been offered. She returned to first class, scanning the seats to see if anyone needed assistance. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Ramona, apparently lost in her e-book. Ramona had asked for a glass of water earlier and had been polite enough, but she didn't engage in small talk like some passengers. Olivia's impression of Ramona's aloof composure remained. She told herself it was no big deal, that first-class travelers often wanted their space, but a small voice at the back of her mind nagged. She had been taught to watch for unusual behavior or anything that might stand out. In training, suspicious behavior could be anything: refusing to make eye contact, acting overly nervous, or even calmly aloof. if it looked contrived. Halfway through the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed, Ramona set her e-reader aside and pulled out a slim, black binder from her carry-on. Inside were pages of official FBI case notes. She carefully angled her seat lamp so that the text remained illuminated but hidden from passing eyes. She didn't want to advertise what she was doing. Ramona recognized that her seat in first class put her in close proximity to flight attendants, and even a stray glance could compromise information. It was during this moment that Olivia passed by. The faint glow from Ramona's reading lamp made the binder contents partially visible, though only if you were specifically looking. From Olivia's vantage point, she couldn't read the text, but she noticed some official-looking emblems and bold typeface. Something about it gave her pause. She thought she caught sight of the letters FBI on a page corner, but she couldn't be entirely sure. Instead of trusting her training to remain calm, Olivia felt her anxiety spike. She recalled the many bulletins flight crew regularly received about heightened travel security, potential threats, suspicious documents, or even stolen identification. The idea that someone might be carrying official-looking documents, maybe forging them, lodged in her mind. She decided to watch Ramona a little more closely for the remainder of the flight, telling herself she was only being cautious. But it wasn't just caution. It was also an unspoken prejudice and a spark of personal frustration that had nothing to do with the passenger in seat 2A. In that fleeting moment, Olivia made a judgment. She internally labeled Ramona's behavior as suspicious, even though she had no direct evidence. That was the beginning of a tragic chain reaction that would catapult them into headlines. By the time the wheels touched down on the runway in Los Angeles, as the flight progressed, passengers settled into their usual airborne routines, sleeping, watching in-flight movies, fiddling with seat adjustments, or flipping through magazines. A collective hush seemed to embrace the aircraft, punctuated only by occasional chatter or the clink of a beverage cart. Olivia found herself more and more distracted. She circulated from row to row, offering drinks and snacks, but her eyes kept drifting to first class, to Ramona. Some part of her knew this was irrational after all. The woman had done nothing overtly suspicious. Yet, there was a gravitational pull of doubt that she couldn't shake. In her mind, she replayed the brief glimpses of those official-looking papers. What if they weren't legitimate? What if Ramona was forging documents or impersonating a government official? The airline's in-house security training videos swirled in Olivia's memory, highlighting how criminals sometimes use first-class seats to avoid detection. Across the aisle, another passenger was demanding attention. He wanted an extra pillow and was trying to flirt with one of the junior flight attendants. Irritated, Olivia stepped away from her vantage point, trying to keep a professional demeanor as she addressed the passenger's needs. But the moment she finished, her gaze reflexively returned to Ramona's seat. Meanwhile, Ramona placed her binder back into her carry-on and locked it with a small combination. She then opened a file on her tablet, discreetly checking an email from her supervisor about an upcoming operation. She had strict protocols about viewing classified material, but she also knew no one would guess she was an FBI agent by looking at her unmarked tablet. Still, she remained vigilant and frequently glanced over her shoulder to ensure no prying eyes lingered. Unbeknownst to her, Olivia's curiosity had mounted to the point of near obsession. The flight attendant approached Ramona, adopting her standard customer service tone. "Monsieur AM, is there anything you need? Another beverage, or perhaps a warm towel?" Ramona gave her a polite smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Just some water would be nice." Olivia nodded and walked away, but her mind replayed every subtle nuance of Ramona's expression. She imagined that Ramona looked nervous, though in reality, Ramona was merely guarding her privacy. By the time Olivia retrieved the water and brought it back, Her unsteady hand was the first external sign of her internal turmoil. She nearly spilled some as she placed the cup on Ramona's tray. "Thank you," Ramona said politely, her eyes lingering on the trembling of Olivia's hand. She wondered if the flight attendant was unwell, but decided not to pry. Olivia's heart pounded with adrenaline as she moved to the galley again. She was convinced something was amiss. In a different world, or if she were having a different kind of day, she might have brushed it aside. But today, her stress levels, combined with implicit bias and those paranoid training videos, spurred her forward. She decided she had enough evidence to be concerned, and a storm was beginning to gather within her, one that would soon blow the lid off any semblance of normalcy on the flight. Olivia stood in the cramped forward galley, the distant hum of airplane engines reverberating through the metal walls. The flight was cruising at 35,000 feet, yet her thoughts seemed to soar even higher, fueled by a potent mix of anxiety and suspicion. She couldn't shake the image of that mysterious binder in Ramona's hands, the official-looking insignia, and the passengers' guarded demeanor. Every instinct, every scrap of training about behavioral red flags was firing in her mind. But a nagging voice reminded her that she had no hard evidence, only a few glimpses and a gut feeling that had grown more intense with each passing hour. Still, Olivia had encountered unusual situations before, though never quite like this. She recalled her past flights, the rowdy sports teams, the inebriated travelers who got belligerent mid-flight, and the occasional minor altercation that required a stern announcement from the captain. In those cases, the signs had been obvious loud voices, slurred speech, or clear defiance of safety regulations. This time, the signs were intangible. Ramona had been polite, calm, and composed, yet something about her projected an air of secrecy that Olivia's rattled mind interpreted as potential danger. Trying to steady her breathing, she turned to her colleague Marcus, the senior flight attendant. Marcus was methodical and rarely jumped to conclusions. When she confided in him about Ramona's binder and the letters FBI she thought she had seen, Marcus listened intently but maintained a measured skepticism. "Olivia," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully, "you've seen official documents before, right? Corporate contracts, law firm briefs, patent files. They can all look pretty serious. We can't jump to labeling them suspicious without more proof. Passengers in first class often carry important paperwork." Olivia exhaled slowly. She wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that stress had clouded her judgment. But each time she tried to shake off her suspicions, the memory of the binder's distinctive emblem returned, glowing ominously in her mind's eye. "I know, Marcus," she replied, keeping her voice low, "but I'm telling you, it looked official, like government seals, watermarks, or something I can't explain. And she was really cautious about anyone seeing it. I tried offering her a beverage, and she nearly snapped her bag shut the moment I approached." Marcus glanced down the aisle toward first class. He saw Ramona, seemingly relaxed in her seat, skimming through something on her tablet. She didn't look tense or agitated. In fact, she appeared to be the picture of composure, the kind of passenger who might just be intensely private. Perhaps she was an attorney with confidential case files, or an executive handling proprietary documents. "Look, I understand your concern," Marcus said gently, "but we have to follow the airline's protocols. If you genuinely believe this is a security threat, we should escalate by alerting the captain, who can then decide if we need ground security waiting in Los Angeles. But be absolutely sure, Olivia, an accusation like this can change someone's life if we're wrong." Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the training videos she had been shown repeatedly, a montage of real-life stories about flight attendants who missed red flags and allowed dangerous individuals to slip through. She could practically hear the voice of the instructor intoning, "When in doubt, report." Better to be safe than sorry. That mantra repeated in her head. She had always vowed never to be the one who overlooked a possible risk. "Okay," she said at last, determination creeping back into her voice. "I'm going to talk to Gail about it. She's the lead attendant. It's her responsibility to coordinate with the captain." Marcus nodded, but there was worry etched on his face. He feared that Olivia might be reading too much into the situation, and yet he also knew airline policy was on her side. Flight attendants were trained to remain hypervigilant. Olivia found Gail in the galley, her expression mirroring the fatigue of managing a packed flight. Gail was flipping through inventory sheets, preparing for the next round of in-flight service. At first, Gail seemed taken aback by Olivia's agitation. "Slow down," Gail said, brows furrowing. "What exactly did you see?" In a hushed voice, Olivia explained the details. The embossed seal she thought she observed, the acronym that might have been FBI, and Ramona's reserved demeanor. Gail listened, occasionally nodding, her face revealing the conflict between caution and uncertainty. "Well," Gail finally responded, "we can't confront a passenger outright unless there's a direct threat. But the captain should be made aware of your concerns. Then we can contact ground security at LAX. If the captain decides there's enough reason, they'll coordinate with the authorities before we land." A rush of relief and dread washed over Olivia. She had a path forward, one that her training affirmed and her policy supported, but she couldn't ignore the knot tightening in her stomach. She left Gail to resume her duties, each step she took toward the cockpit feeling heavier than the last. In the cabin, the lights were dimmed, and most passengers were either asleep or engrossed in their in-flight entertainment. The hush felt thick, as if the entire plane were holding its breath. She passed Ramona's seat and tried not to stare. Ramona hardly acknowledged her, seemingly lost in the world of her tablet screen. Olivia wondered if this was the calm before the storm, or if she was simply about to spark a chaotic chain of events for no real reason. Nevertheless, she pressed on, each footstep echoing her resolve. Whether her suspicions were justified or not, Olivia believed she was following the procedure that her training and her conscience demanded. By the end of the flight, she would find out just how steep the cost of that decision would be. The plane began its initial descent into Los Angeles, and the lights of the sprawling metropolis shimmered through the windows. Passengers stirred awake, returned their seats to the upright position, and began putting away electronics. Conversations picked up as everyone anticipated the final approach. Ramona felt a tingle of excitement at the thought of being home again, even briefly. She turned off her tablet, safely tucked it back in her carry-on, and fastened her seatbelt as the seatbelt sign chimed. She had no idea that, in the flight deck, the captain was in constant communication with LAX security. Under normal circumstances, if there had been a credible threat, standard protocol would have been to divert the plane or escalate the situation earlier. But the flight was already close to its destination, and the signals from the flight crew were too vague to warrant an emergency. Nonetheless, law enforcement officials at LAX were preparing for a possible threat. The airline's security department had been briefed. The passenger in seat 2A was allegedly in possession of suspicious documents and might be masquerading under false credentials. Olivia was on edge, her pulse pounding. She and Marcus quickly secured the cabin for landing, all while trying to maintain calm expressions. The last thing they wanted was to tip off other passengers and cause a panic. Ramona, having no reason to suspect danger, felt only a mild annoyance at how often Olivia seemed to linger around her seat. The flight attendant's anxious eyes darted in Ramona's direction repeatedly. At one point, Ramona even considered if Olivia was feeling ill or if perhaps the flight attendant recognized her from somewhere. She chalked it up to a particularly attentive cabin crew, As the wheels touched down on the runway, Ramona closed her eyes, feeling the familiar jolt of the landing gear meeting asphalt. It was a smooth landing, and she prepared to gather her things, eager to disembark and start her journey home. She could already envision a hot shower, a change of clothes, and a quiet evening with takeout. But, as the aircraft taxied to the gate, she noticed that the seat belt sign remained on longer than usual. The pilot's voice came over the intercom with a curious announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Los Angeles International Airport, but please remain seated with your seat belts fastened until we receive final clearance." Ramona's eyebrows drew together in slight confusion. In her years of frequent flying, she recognized that the plane usually parked at the gate before such a delay. Through the window, she could see multiple police cruisers with flashing lights approaching the plane. Tension rippled through the cabin as some passengers pointed at the unusual sight. Murmurs of confusion spread like wildfire. Her instincts flared. Something was amiss. Ramona unbuckled her belt slightly, craning her neck to see if anything was happening in the aisle. Unaware that ground security was on the other side of the aircraft doors, possibly waiting to confront her, Ramona braced herself for whatever lay ahead. In just a few short minutes, the suspicion cast by Olivia would ignite a confrontation that would test not just Ramona's composure, but her identity as a federal agent. Two uniformed security officers boarded the plane the moment the aircraft door opened. One was an airport security official, and the other an LAPD officer who had been called in to ensure proper procedure. They were greeted by Gail, the lead flight attendant, who pointed them discreetly toward row 2A. A hush fell over the cabin as the officers moved with determined steps. Ramona, feeling the tension escalate, clutched her carry-on bag. Her pulse quickened, although her face remained calm. Years of FBI training had taught her to maintain composure in uncertain situations. Yet her mind was racing, trying to figure out what on earth had triggered such a response. "Ma'am," one of the officers addressed her, "we need you to come with us. Please stand up slowly and bring your belongings." From somewhere behind them, Olivia peeked around, her face a mask of tightly wound anxiety. She half expected the passenger to become belligerent or reveal some kind of fake ID on the spot. Instead, Ramona slowly stood, meeting the officer's gaze evenly. "May I ask why?" she inquired, her voice steady. The officer's face was impassive. "We received a report about suspicious documentation in your possession. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Murmurs spread among the nearby passengers. A few took out phones to record the unfolding drama. Marcus remained at the back of the cabin, torn between following protocol and wanting to intervene. He had never fully bought into Olivia's concerns, and now, seeing the humiliating spectacle, his stomach churned. Ramona nodded, understanding the seriousness but baffled as to how it had come to this. She reached into her bag to retrieve her identification. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes flashed with the slightest hint of anger. "I have documentation that might clarify everything." Olivia watched from a distance, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She noticed Ramona was reaching into her bag, a moment that flight crew are trained to watch with caution. A pang of fear shot through Olivia. What if she has a weapon? The police officer gently placed a hand on Ramona's arm to stop her. "Ma'am, we'll need to check that bag." Ramona froze, then slowly withdrew her hand, respecting the officer's instruction. She complied with every request, stepping aside into the jet bridge with the officers. Passengers craned their necks, whispering and speculating. Once in the jet bridge, the officer asked to see what was inside the carry-on. Ramona held out her ID, her real identification. The Department of Justice shield gleamed, the unmistakable credentials of an FBI special agent. The airport official's expression morphed from stern authority into startled recognition. "Wait, you're an FBI agent?" he asked in disbelief. Ramona nodded, opening the badge case so both could see the credentials more clearly. Yes, Special Agent Ramona Jefferson. I have no idea why you'd think my documents were suspicious. They're official and classified. A tense silence filled the corridor. Olivia hovered a few feet away, her mind reeling at the revelation. She watched as the officers exchanged looks of exasperation and confusion. The tide had changed in an instant. What began as a swirl of suspicion was about to turn back on the accusers in a cataclysmic blow of karmic justice. The two officers inspected Ramona's FBI credentials meticulously. It didn't take them long to confirm that the ID was legitimate. There it was, complete with her photograph, holographic seal, and current status as a federally recognized law enforcement agent. A wave of embarrassment washed over them as they realized how quickly the situation had escalated and how unnecessarily. Inside the jet bridge, Ramona quietly explained that the binder contained sensitive case files she was reviewing in flight. Nothing nefarious, nothing forged. She also revealed that she'd used her miles to upgrade to first class, a detail that might have seemed suspicious to those who believed stereotypes about who belongs in premium seating. Meanwhile, Olivia stood just outside the jet bridge, feeling her heart sink. She sensed Marcus approaching behind her. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with concern rather than condemnation. But in Olivia's mind, everything moved in slow motion. Her hasty judgment, the unsubstantiated suspicion, the humiliation unfolding. It felt like a trap closing in on her from all sides. Ramona's voice, still calmly measured, carried out into the waiting area. "Who reported me?" she asked the officers. "I'd like to know the grounds for this." They glanced uncomfortably at each other. One cleared his throat. "We received a report from the flight deck. The flight crew believed you might be in possession of falsified documents. That's all the information we had before we came on board." Ramona sighed, her cheeks flushing with a mix of anger and disappointment. She was painfully aware that instances like these were not uncommon for black travelers who were singled out by suspicious staff. Even as a federal agent, she was not immune to biases or assumptions. Stepping forward, Olivia finally summoned the courage to own up to her actions. "That was me," she said, softly, her voice trembling. I thought the documents might be forged. I'm sorry, I was only trying to ensure everyone's safety." Ramona's eyes locked with Olivia's, searching for an explanation. "Why did you think they were forged? Did I do something that indicated I was a threat?" Words caught in Olivia's throat. She wanted to cite the training videos, the emphasis on spotting unusual behavior, the glimpses of official seals she didn't fully understand. But deeper than that, she knew it was her own bias and stress that fueled her leap to conclusions. She stammered, "I saw the binder and it looked official. I was worried you might," she faltered, unable to finish the sentence. A quiet fury rose within Ramona. She'd encountered discrimination before, but rarely so blatantly. Yet her training to remain calm under pressure prevailed. "Next time," she said, her voice laced with a measured edge, "investigate more thoroughly before you assume someone is a criminal." The officers, eager to diffuse the tension, apologized to Ramona and escorted her back into the terminal, letting her know she was free to go. But the damage was done. A cluster of curious passengers had gathered at the jet bridge exit, cameras and phones raised. Ramona felt a million eyes on her as she walked away, her head held high. Behind her, Olivia stood in the doorway, reeling from the realization of what she'd done and the ramifications that were sure to follow. A stunned hush settled over the cabin and gate area once Ramona was cleared. Passengers filed out, giving wary looks to Olivia, who remained frozen near the plane door. Some asked the officers if they could leave, and the officers nodded, letting the passengers disembark. Marcus approached Olivia, his tone subdued. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, not quite knowing what else to say. He was sorry for Olivia, for the humiliation Ramona endured, and for being part of a system that had let this happen. A representative from the airline's ground operations arrived, rushing into the gate area, phone in hand. She briefly spoke with the security officers and the captain. The story was already spreading. Other passengers in first class, outraged by the scene, had begun posting videos and tweets. Within minutes, hashtags like hashtag flying while black, hashtag FBI, and hashtag airline scandal started surfacing on social media platforms. Ramona didn't escape the terminal unnoticed. A few curious journalists, who happened to be traveling themselves, caught wind of the incident. They approached her, asking for a statement. Ramona, trying to maintain her composure, simply stated, "This was a misunderstanding, but it reflects a deeper issue in our society." Then she politely declined further questions and hurried away, protective of both her privacy and her job. Meanwhile, Olivia was ushered away by airline supervisors. She was led into a small office behind the gate, where the mood was tense. Gail, the lead attendant, was there, as well as two airline managers who had the task of debriefing and investigating the chain of events. They peppered Olivia with questions. What exactly did you see? Why did you think it was suspicious? Did she exhibit any dangerous behavior? Olivia found herself stumbling through her explanations, trying to justify her actions. She mentioned the flight crew training about suspicious documents, the glimpses of FBI insignia she couldn't verify, and Ramona's aloof behavior. She also muttered about her stress levels, but none of it sounded convincing when spoken aloud. Marcus, too, was questioned. He explained Olivia's concerns, but also expressed that he had not observed anything alarming about Ramona. The airline managers exchanged dismayed looks. They recognized a PR nightmare unfolding, especially if it turned out that Olivia's suspicion was wholly unfounded and rooted in bias. Outside that cramped room, the airport was ablaze with gossip. Passengers who witnessed the confrontation were still talking among themselves. A few had recognized Ramona as an FBI agent once she flashed her badge. Word spread quickly that an innocent black woman, who turned out to be a federal agent, had been singled out and humiliated. And so the seeds of scandal took root. Even before anyone left LAX, calls for accountability echoed. The airline's corporate offices in Atlanta began issuing statements about investigating the incident thoroughly. Social media demanded answers, and more than a few outraged netizens declared they'd boycott the airline. For Olivia, the immediate aftermath felt like a whirlwind of shock, guilt, and regret. She knew there was no easy way to walk this back. The only thing left was to face the consequences of her fateful decision. The very next day, a flurry of activity rocked the airline's corporate headquarters in Atlanta. Executives scrambled to contain what was fast becoming a public relations firestorm. They awakened to dozens of emails, phone calls from news outlets, and an avalanche of social media notifications. Passengers who had been on the flight gave interviews detailing the incident, with some describing Olivia's actions as blatant profiling. Major news channels picked up the story. Flight attendant accuses black woman of suspicious behavior. Turns out she's an FBI agent. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Panelists on morning shows debated issues of systemic bias, the training of flight attendants, and the stark reality that even an FBI badge isn't enough to shield someone from prejudice. Olivia watched these developments with a sinking heart, holed up in her small apartment in Atlanta. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from co-workers, friends, and even her estranged family members, all wanting to know what really happened. She declined to comment, aware that anything she said might further incriminate her or worsen the airline's predicament. By mid-afternoon, a stern email arrived from the airline's HR department. Olivia was placed on immediate unpaid suspension, pending the results of an internal investigation. The message, succinct and cold, stung her. We regret to inform you that due to the serious nature of the incident on Flight 4427, you are relieved of your duties. Please refrain from wearing the company uniform or representing the airline in any capacity until further notice. Frantically, Olivia messaged Marcus for support. He offered sympathetic words, but he was also under scrutiny. Gail, the lead attendant, faced questions about why she hadn't intervened more decisively. The entire flight crew was in the hot seat. The airline's legal team was bracing for a potential lawsuit, especially if the FBI agent decided to press charges for discrimination or defamation. Meanwhile, Ramona Jefferson found herself in an uncomfortable spotlight. She fielded calls from her superiors at the FBI, who were concerned about the negative publicity. While they understood she was the victim in this case, the Bureau had an interest in controlling the narrative. Public perception of the FBI mattered, and they wanted to ensure Ramona was protected while also maintaining the agency's decorum. Her direct supervisor asked her to come in for a briefing. In a quiet office in downtown Los Angeles, Ramona recounted the incident in detail, how she was reading sensitive documents, the flight attendant's unease, and the humiliating confrontation. She also expressed frustration at how easily her credentials had been dismissed. The supervisor nodded gravely. "Agent Jefferson will support you in any legal action you wish to take," he stated. "But we also have to be mindful of how the Bureau is perceived. For now, maintain your composure in public. Make no statements without approval. Let's see how the airline responds, and then we'll decide on next steps." Ramona walked out of that meeting with mixed feelings: relief that she wasn't in trouble at work, anger at how she had been treated, and a sense of responsibility to address the broader issue of profiling. She wondered if there was a chance for justice, or even redemption, in the midst of this very public fiasco. While the airline's public relations team was busy trying to stifle the flames, the story continued to spread. Journalists dug deeper, unearthing information about Olivia's background. They found no glaring history of misconduct, but they highlighted incidents in which flight attendants across various airlines had been accused of bias. The scandal became a focal point of national discourse on prejudice in the airline industry. Amid the chaos, Olivia received a text from an unknown number. It read, "I've been there. You messed up, but there might still be a way to make things right. Meet me?" At first, she ignored it, convinced it was some prank or harassment. But a second message followed with more details. A location in downtown Atlanta, a small coffee shop near Centennial Olympic Park. Against her better judgment, Olivia decided to go. Desperation gnawed at her. She had no one to turn to, and she worried she might lose her job and her career completely. The coffee shop was sparsely populated when Olivia arrived. She scanned the room until she spotted a tall black woman with a business casual outfit sitting at a corner table. The woman raised a hand in greeting, signaling Olivia over. Olivia approached cautiously, sinking into the seat across from her. "I'm sorry, but do I know you?" The woman smiled kindly. "We haven't met. My name is Janelle Porter. I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights cases. I heard about your situation from a mutual acquaintance in the airline industry." Olivia's face scrunched in confusion. "Wait, you're here to help me?" Janelle nodded. "I'm not on your airline's payroll, if that's what you're asking, but I've handled multiple cases involving alleged discrimination by flight attendants. Usually I'm on the other side, representing the passengers who were profiled." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But from what I've gathered, You're not a hardened racist. You made a very bad call, driven by stress and possibly unconscious bias. That doesn't excuse you, but it does mean you might have a path to redemption if you handle this responsibly." Olivia felt tears well up in her eyes. She hated to admit it, but Janelle was right. She had acted on a terrible impulse. "Why would you help me? Doesn't that go against your beliefs?" Janelle sipped her coffee calmly. "I believe in justice, but I also believe in creating space for people to learn and change. If you're willing to come clean publicly, apologize, and advocate for better training and awareness, we might turn this tragedy into a teachable moment." For the first time since the incident, Olivia felt a glimmer of hope. She knew an apology alone wouldn't undo the humiliation Ramona experienced, nor the black mark now on the airline's reputation. But perhaps it was a start. Over the next hour, they discussed possible strategies, everything from issuing a heartfelt public apology to pushing for updated bias training for flight attendants. Unbeknownst to Olivia, her journey was aligning with Ramona's in ways neither had anticipated. The road to redemption for both the airline and Olivia would be paved with honesty and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Several days later, Ramona Jefferson received an unexpected invitation from an intermediary at the airline. They proposed a meeting in a neutral conference room at a downtown LA law firm. The stated purpose was to discuss a possible resolution and to address the broader issues exposed by the incident. Ramona mulled over whether to attend. Part of her felt that the airline was merely trying to limit the damage. But another part, the part that had joined the FBI to serve justice, wanted to see if this could become a catalyst for lasting change. She agreed to meet, provided she could bring her own legal counsel, and that the discussion be off the record initially. The day of the meeting arrived. Ramona and her attorney walked into a minimalist conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. On one side of a long, polished table sat two airline representatives, including the head of HR and a corporate lawyer. On the other side sat Olivia Campbell, accompanied by Janelle Porter. Ramona felt her pulse quicken as she recognized Olivia immediately. The flight attendant looked visibly tense, her eyes downcast. Introductions were made in a subdued manner. The airline's HR head spoke first, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. They offered a formal apology, stating the company had failed to handle the matter properly. They mentioned a new initiative to revamp bias training and pledged that all flight attendants would undergo additional cultural sensitivity seminars. Then Olivia took a deep breath and addressed Ramona directly. "I know there's no excuse for what I did," she began, her voice trembling. "But I want you to know I'm truly sorry. I let my biases and fears get the better of me. I never intended to humiliate you or question your identity in such a demeaning way." Ramona watched Olivia carefully, assessing the sincerity in her eyes. Behind Ramona, her lawyer nodded, indicating they should listen before responding. Ramona cleared her throat, her voice calm but resolute. "It's good that you recognize what happened was wrong, but you do understand the consequences were severe for me as well. I was publicly humiliated, questioned, and treated like a criminal. What if I hadn't had my badge on me? How far would this have gone?" Olivia swallowed hard. "I don't know. That terrifies me. After everything that's happened, I see how deeply flawed my reaction was. I want to do whatever I can to make this right." Silence filled the room. Then Janelle Porter leaned forward and proposed a restorative justice approach. Rather than pursuing an immediate lawsuit, the idea was to create a formal platform where Ramona and Olivia could share their experiences, with the airline bearing responsibility to implement robust anti-discrimination measures. Additionally, the airline would compensate Ramona for damages, emotional distress, and any legal fees incurred. Ramona listened, weighing the options. She knew she had every right to sue for a larger amount, but would that alone fix the underlying issues? As an FBI agent, she was well aware that meaningful policy change often carried more weight than a legal settlement. She stared at Olivia, seeing the genuine remorse in her face. "All right," Ramona said, her tone measured. "I'll agree to this, provided the airline follows through and we hold a public forum to address this situation so others can learn." With that tentative agreement, the seeds of a different kind of resolution were planted. But the saga was not over. The next steps would involve facing the public, the media, and a world eager to see if real lessons would emerge from such a fiasco. In the weeks that followed, the airline issued a public statement acknowledging the incident and pledging to invest significantly in bias training for all employees, not just flight attendants. They announced an internal restructuring of the complaint and escalation process, vowing that situations like what happened to Ramona would never again reach such a humiliating zenith without thorough checks. Meanwhile, a national conversation sparked by the incident continued to rage on talk shows, social media platforms, and community forums. Ramona found herself in the peculiar position of being both victim and educator. She gave a measured interview discussing the reality of racial bias in travel and how even law enforcement officers of color aren't exempt from suspicion. Her calm demeanor and professional insights resonated with many viewers, shining a light on systemic issues without resorting to mere anger or blame. True to her word, Ramona participated in a public forum sponsored by the airline. She stood on stage with Olivia and Janelle Porter. The audience included airline employees, civil rights advocates, and media representatives. Cameras flashed, capturing the uneasy partnership between two women who had been adversaries just weeks before. In her remarks, Ramona spoke about the pain of being profiled, even unintentionally. "We need to recognize the power of our unconscious biases," she said. "We can't address them if we deny they exist. This isn't just about me, it's about every person who's been judged unfairly based on race or appearance." Then Olivia took the microphone, her voice steady despite the nervous tremor in her hands. "I was wrong," she said, her eyes lingering on Ramona for a moment. "I acted out of fear and suspicion that had no basis in fact. I realize now that this was a symptom of a larger problem. I'm grateful for the chance to learn from it, and I hope we all do." Karma's sting had been swift for Olivia. She lost her job with the airline, despite the public forum. The airline's investigation concluded that her conduct, while stemming from misjudgment, had caused irreparable harm. However, because of her willingness to take responsibility and the newly formed relationships through Janelle's guidance, she found a role in a non-profit organization dedicated to fighting workplace discrimination. In an ironic twist, she was now working alongside civil rights advocates, using her experience as a cautionary tale. Ramona continued her work with the FBI, garnering respect from her peers for handling the situation with grace and tenacity. On the surface, she returned to her busy schedule of casework and investigations. But she also carried a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her personal ordeal had helped expose the ugly truths of bias in a tangible, visible way that reached millions. 1 year later, in a quiet corridor at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Ramona passed through on another assignment. This time, the flight attendants who greeted her employees of the very same airline showed a marked change in their demeanor. They were conscientious, polite, but also alert in a different way. Ramona could sense they were better trained, more aware, perhaps some real progress had been made. She boarded her flight and settled into her seat, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that began with a simple trip from Atlanta to Los Angeles. It was a chapter of her life defined by turbulence, but also by healing, growth, and a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, The world was learning how to be a little more, just one flight at a time. Thank you for following this whirlwind journey from misunderstanding to redemption. In a single flight, we saw how split-second biases can spiral into life-altering events, especially for people who are too often judged unfairly by those in positions of authority. Yet in the face of shock and humiliation, justice and introspection paved a path to healing. Ramona's quiet dignity and Olivia's quest for redemption remind us that transforming prejudices, both institutional and personal, is not just a corporate checkbox. It's a moral responsibility we share. If this story resonated with you, please remember to click that like button. Share it with friends who might need a reminder that awareness can spark real change. And subscribe to this channel for more stories that tackle society's most pressing issues. Your engagement keeps these conversations alive, so together, let's keep shedding light and building a more understanding world. Thank you for watching.